I started working at the Kessler Water Treatment Facility on March 3rd, 2019. I remember the date because it was a Monday, and because my car had broken down the Friday before, so my mother drove me. I was 31 years old. She dropped me off at the gate and told me to call her at lunch if I wanted a ride home. I didn't call her. I walked the 4 miles back to her house after my shift because I didn't want to explain why I'd been crying in the bathroom during my orientation. It wasn't anything dramatic. I wasn't scared or overwhelmed. I was just tired. I'd been out of work for almost a year and sitting in that conference room watching a PowerPoint about chloramine injection protocols while a woman named Deb handed me a lanyard with my photo on it. A photo they'd taken 30 seconds earlier. My face still puffy from poor sleep. Something about the normalcy of it broke me open for a minute. I went to the restroom, pressed paper towels against my eyes, and came back. Nobody noticed or cared. That's what I liked about the place. Nobody watched you too closely. The Kessler facility is about 20 minutes outside of Alderton, Ohio. It serves 3 townships and a portion of the unincorporated county. It's not a large operation. The treatment plant itself is a collection of rectangular concrete buildings. Most of them built in the late 60s, a few additions from the 80s, connected by covered walkways and underground utility corridors. The grounds are flat, mostly gravel and dead grass. There's a chain-link perimeter fence with green privacy slats that have faded to gray. The parking lot holds maybe 30 cars on a full shift. It smells like iron and chlorine and wet concrete. In the winter, when the wind comes across the settling basins, it smells like cold pennies. I was hired as a maintenance technician, not a plumber, not an engineer. My job was preventive maintenance, checking pumps, replacing filters, greasing bearings, reading gauges, logging equipment status. Most of my day was walking a route through the facility with a clipboard, then later a tablet, recording numbers and checking boxes. Pump pressure! Flow rate. Temperature. Hours on each motor. The work was repetitive and physical enough to keep you from going crazy with boredom, but quiet enough that you could spend hours without speaking to another person. I worked with a rotating crew. Mornings, it was usually me, a guy named Dale who'd been there since 2004, and sometimes a contract electrician named Y, who came in twice a week. Dale was in his 50s, former military, and had the kind of silence that wasn't unfriendly but also didn't invite conversation. He'd answer questions if you asked them. Otherwise, he listened to talk radio through one earbud and did his rounds. Y was younger, talkative when present, but only there Tuesdays and Thursdays. The facility ran 24 hours, obviously. Water doesn't stop. But the maintenance crew was only staffed during the day shift, 6 to 2:30, with a half-hour lunch. After 2:30, the plant operated on automated systems and a single control room operator who monitored everything remotely. If something broke at night, there was an on-call rotation. I got put on it after my 3rd month. I'm explaining all this because the details matter. Because what happened didn't happen in a haunted house or an abandoned hospital. It happened in a functioning municipal building where people clocked in and out every day, where the coffee in the break room was always slightly burned, where the bulletin board had a flyer for a chili cook-off that was 3 years out of date. It happened in the most ordinary place I've ever worked. The maintenance logs were physical binders. That's the first thing people find hard to believe. That in 2019, a facility was still using paper logs. But Kessler was behind on everything. The computer system they used for scheduling was from 2006. Half the sensors in the older buildings still had analog readouts. The maintenance logs were 3-ring binders, one for each building section, kept in a metal cabinet in the maintenance office. Each page was a pre-printed form with date, technician name, equipment checked, readings recorded, and a notes section at the bottom. You filled them out by hand at the end of each shift. I have neat handwriting. My mother is left-handed and insisted I learn to write properly with my right, so I developed this very controlled, slightly cramped print that people have commented on my whole life. It's distinctive. The letters are tall and narrow, and I dot my I's with a short horizontal dash instead of a dot, a habit I picked up from my mother. My 7s have crossbars. My 4s are open at the top. I'm telling you this because it matters. I know my own handwriting the way you know your own face. The first time was in October. I'd been there about 7 months. Dale had asked me to pull the binder for Building C. That was the chemical storage and the older filtration gallery, because he wanted to check when the last bearing replacement had been done on one of the recirculation pumps. He thought it was overdue. I opened the cabinet, pulled the binder for Building C, and started flipping backward through the pages. The binder went back years. Hundreds of pages in protective sleeves, the oldest ones yellowed and coffee-stained. I was looking for a specific entry, so I was flipping quickly, scanning the equipment columns for Pump C7 or Recirc 3. I found what Dale needed, a note from 2017 about the bearing swap, but as I was flipping back to return the binder to its spot, a page caught my eye. It was near the back third of the binder. The date at the top was September 14th, 2018, 6 months before I was hired. And the handwriting was mine. I don't mean it was similar. I don't mean it resembled mine. I mean it was mine. The tall, narrow letters, the crossed 7s and the timestamps, the horizontal dashes over the I's A, the specific way I write a capital B, with the bottom loop slightly larger than the top, the way my G's curve. My mother always said they looked like the number 9. All of it. Every detail. I stood there for a long time. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. I read the entry. It was routine. Building C, Section 2. Chemical feed pump inspection. Readings were normal. In the notes section it said, slight corrosion on discharge valve flange. Recommend inspection next quarter. The technician name at the top of the form was printed in block letters. M. Ellison. My name is Marcus Ellison. I closed the binder. I didn't say anything to Dale. I put it back in the cabinet and told him the bearing replacement had been in March 2017, which was true. He nodded and went back to work. I thought about it that night. I thought about it reasonably. The most logical explanation was that someone else named M. Ellison had worked there before me. Kessler wasn't a huge operation, but it had turnover. Maintenance techs came and went. It was possible. Unlikely, but possible, that another person with my last name and same first initial had worked there previously and happened to have similar handwriting. I almost believed that. I wanted to believe it. But I kept seeing the page in my mind, the corrosion note. The way discharge was spelled. The way I always write it, with the C and the H, almost fused together because I write quickly when I'm noting something procedural. The exact angle of the slant. I told myself to let it go. 2 weeks later, I went back to the binder. I told myself I was checking something for a work order, but I was looking for more entries. I started from the back of the binder, the oldest pages, and worked forward. Most of the entries were clearly other people's handwriting. Dale's heavy block print, a scratchy cursive that belonged to someone named Torres, a very neat, almost mechanical hand from someone named Pham, and then every 15 to 20 pages, there it was, my handwriting, always attributed to M. Ellison, always routine, always unremarkable in content. I found 6 entries spread between July 2018 and February 2019, the month before I was hired. The last one was dated February 19th, 2019. I was hired March 3rd. I want to be clear about something. I did not work at this facility before March 2019. I had never been to Alderton, Ohio before my mother moved there in 2018 after her divorce. I spent most of 2018 living in a studio apartment in Columbus, working temp jobs and applying for permanent positions. I have pay stubs. I have a lease agreement. I have text messages from that period. I was in Columbus. I was not at the Kessler Water Treatment Facility filling out maintenance logs. I checked the other binders. Buildings A, B, D in the admin section. I found entries in all of them. Not many, maybe 2 or 3 per binder. But all in the same handwriting. All signed M. Ellison. All dated between July 2018 and February 2019. I counted them. 16 entries total across all buildings over an 8-month period. They described routine maintenance tasks, pump inspections, filter changes, gauge calibrations. One mentioned a small water leak near a floor drain in Building D that needed caulking. Another noted that a light bulb was out in a utility corridor. Completely ordinary. Whoever wrote them, whoever I am refusing to say was me, they were doing the same job I was doing now. I did something that I'm not sure was smart, but I needed to do it. I went to Deb in Human Resources. I told her I was looking for training records from a previous technician and asked if there had been another M. Ellison on staff before me. She checked the system. That old 2006 software, and told me no. No one by that name before me. I asked if she could check further back, maybe under a different department code. She seemed slightly annoyed, but looked again. No record. You're the only Ellison we've had, she said. Why? Just a name I saw in an old form, I said. Probably misread it. She nodded and went back to her screen. I went back to work. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? I found my own handwriting in old files, and it's impossible. People would think I was joking, or confused, or... And this is what I was most afraid of. They would look at the pages and not see what I saw. They'd say the handwriting was close, but not identical. They'd say I was reading into it. And maybe they'd be right. Maybe I was losing perspective. Maybe handwriting isn't as unique as we think, and somewhere there was a perfectly reasonable M. Ellison who had worked here briefly, maybe as a temp, maybe off the books, and whose handwriting happened to share characteristics with mine. I tried to let it go. For a while, I succeeded. November came. The days got short. By the time my shift ended at 2:30, the sky was already graying. The facility felt different in winter, more enclosed, more concrete, the hallways echoing more because the windows were shut and the ventilation hummed louder to compensate for the sealed environment. I did my rounds. I filled out my logs. I did not go back to look at the old entries. But then something else happened. It was a Wednesday, November 20th, I think, or maybe the 21st. I was doing an afternoon check on the blower motors in building a sub-basement level. This was the lowest part of the facility, a series of utility corridors that ran beneath the main treatment floor. Low ceilings, fluorescent lighting, the constant thrum of pumps, and the hiss of air handling. The floors were painted concrete, slightly damp in places from condensation. It was always about 10 degrees warmer down there than the rest of the building. I had a specific route through the sub-basement. I'd check the blower motor bearings, record temperatures on the main line heat exchangers, and visually inspect the pipe runs for leaks or corrosion. It took about 40 minutes. I'd done it hundreds of times. That day, I noticed something on the wall near one of the junction boxes. Someone had written in pencil, very small, on the concrete just above the conduit run. I almost missed it. It was in the shadow between 2 pipes, and I only saw it because I dropped my pen and crouched down to pick it up. It said, "Check valve 7 before Tuesday." It was my handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. It was written lightly in pencil, the kind of quick note someone might jot to remind themselves of something. The concrete was slightly rough, so the letters were a bit uneven, but the formation was unmistakable. The tall letters, the crossed 7, the dash over the IN before. I reached out and touched it. The graphite was old. It didn't smudge under my finger the way fresh pencil would. It had been there for a while. I stood up. My heart was beating in a way I didn't like. Not fast exactly, but hard. Each beat felt deliberate, like my body was trying to tell me something. I finished my rounds. I didn't make a note of the writing. I didn't photograph it. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want evidence. Maybe I was afraid that if I looked at a photo later, it would clearly be someone else's handwriting, and I'd have to face the possibility that I was seeing things. Or maybe, and this is the thought that kept me up that night, I was afraid it would still look exactly like mine, even in a photograph, and then I'd have no way to doubt it anymore. That night, I lay in my bed in my mother's spare room and thought about valve 7. There was a valve 7 in building A's sub-basement, a check valve on one of the backflow preventers. I knew this because I'd inspected it recently. It had been fine. Normal operation, no issues. But the note said before Tuesday. The following Tuesday, I checked valve 7 first thing. It was fine. Normal position, no leaks, no corrosion beyond what was already documented. I felt stupid and relieved, and then angry at myself for checking. I was responding to graffiti on a wall as if it were instructions left for me. I went back to the spot where I'd seen the pencil writing. I was going to erase it. I brought a damp rag. It was already gone. The wall was bare, just concrete, slightly discolored in that area the way old concrete gets, but no writing. I ran my fingers over the surface. Nothing, no residue, no indentation. I crouched there for probably 2 minutes, just staring at the wall. Then I stood up, finished my shift, and went home. December. The days contracted further. I started arriving in darkness and leaving in half-light. The facility was decorated sparsely for the holidays. Deb had put a small artificial tree in the break room, and someone taped a paper snowflake to the control room window. The normalcy of it felt aggressive somehow, like the building was insisting on being ordinary. I hadn't found any more handwriting on walls. I hadn't gone back to look at the old binders. I was sleeping poorly, but I attributed that to the season and the early alarm. I took melatonin. I drank less coffee afternoon. I was managing. Then Dale said something that undid all of it. We were in the maintenance office, end of shift, filling out our logs. He was at his desk. I was at mine. The radio was on low. Some AM station playing oldies. He was looking at a work order on his screen, and he said, without looking up, "You ever figure out who had your locker before?" I looked at him. "What?" "Your locker, 12. He gestured vaguely toward the hallway where the lockers were. "When you started, Deb gave you 12, but there was still stuff in it. I didn't remember this. When I'd started, I'd been assigned locker 12 in the changing area near Building B. As far as I recalled, it had been empty." "I don't think there was anything in it," I said. Dale shrugged. "Maybe they cleared it before you started, but I remember seeing a jacket in there before you came. Thought it was weird because 12 had been empty for a while." "How long is a while?" "I don't know. Months? We had a guy leave, Reeves, I think, but he was in the 20s. 12's been empty since I can remember. Then there was a jacket in it for a few weeks, and then you started." He paused. "It was probably nothing, just thought it was funny." "What kind of jacket?" He looked at me then, a little surprised that I was pressing. "I don't know. Dark green, maybe? Like a work jacket. I only noticed because it was in a locker nobody was using. I own a dark green work jacket. I was wearing it at that moment. I looked down at it. Dale looked at it too. Then he looked at my face and something in his expression shifted. Not fear, exactly, but the recognition that he'd said something that landed differently than he intended. "It's a common jacket," he said. Probably wasn't even the same one. Probably not. He went back to his screen. I went back to my log. But my pen didn't move for a long time. That night, I tried to remember my first day more carefully. Arriving with my mother. The gate. The conference room. Deb and the lanyard. The tour of the facility. Being shown the lockers. Had there been anything in locker 12? I couldn't remember. It was 9 months ago, and I hadn't been paying attention to the inside of a locker. I'd been focused on not seeming nervous, on remembering names, on trying to believe that this job would be the thing that finally stabilized my life. But now I was thinking about it, and the more I tried to remember, the less certain I became about any of it. Had Deb specifically chosen locker 12 for me, or had she let me pick? I thought she'd assigned it. Why would she assign a locker that had someone's jacket in it? Unless it had been emptied just before I arrived. Unless whoever had left the jacket had known I was coming. I am aware of how that sounds. January 2020. I'd been at Kessler for 10 months. The new year came quietly. I spent it at my mother's kitchen table eating black-eyed peas and watching the ball drop on her small television. She asked if I was happy at the job. I said yes. It was mostly true. The work was steady. I was good at it. My body had adapted to the early mornings. I'd even started to enjoy the solitude of the rounds, the meditative quality of walking the same corridors, checking the same equipment, recording the same numbers. There was comfort in repetition. Except that repetition had taken on a different quality now. Every time I walked my route, I was aware that someone, something, whatever word you want to use, had walked it before me, writing my name in logs, wearing what might have been my jacket, noting the same valves and pumps I noted, doing my job. Before it was my job. I developed a habit I'm not proud of. At the end of each shift, after filling out my log, I would flip back through the binder and compare my current entries to the old M. Ellison entries from 2018. I was looking for differences. I wanted to find something... anything. That would prove the old handwriting wasn't mine. A letter formed differently. A spacing inconsistency. A different way of writing a particular word. I never found one. What I did find in late January was something worse. I was flipping through the Building D binder, the one that covered the administrative wing and the storage areas, looking at an old entry from August 2018. It was a routine inspection of the HVAC system. Normal readings, no issues. But in the notes section, the entry said, Unit 4 compressor running hot. 186 degrees F at discharge. Within tolerance but trending. Monitor. I knew that compressor. I'd flagged it myself in November because its discharge temperature was creeping up. It was at 191 degrees last time I checked. Maintenance had scheduled a replacement for spring. That wasn't what disturbed me. What disturbed me was that I flipped forward to my own entries from November and found my note about the same compressor. My wording was, Unit 4 compressor discharge temp trending up, 191 degrees FREC, monitoring and EVL for replacement. The old entry and my entry said nearly the same thing, the same observation, the same unit, the same concern. As if someone in August 2018 had noticed the same slow failure I noticed in November 2019 and written about it in almost the same language I would later use. This could be coincidence. It's a compressor. It has a discharge temperature. If it's running hot, any competent technician would note it in similar language. I told myself this. I told myself this was how maintenance works. You observe, you document. You use standard terminology. Two people noticing the same equipment issue would naturally describe it similarly. But the handwriting, that was always where my rationalizations collapsed. You can explain similar language. You can explain a common name. You cannot explain identical handwriting. In February, I started looking into whether I had ever experienced any gaps in my memory. I don't mean this dramatically. I mean, I sat down with my phone and scrolled through old text messages, old photos, my Google Maps timeline, trying to account for July through February of the previous year, the period when the old entries were being written. Everything checked out. I could account for my time. I was in Columbus. I was working temp jobs. 3 different ones, actually, between July and February. I had text conversations with friends, photos from a birthday dinner, a dentist appointment in September. There were no missing weeks, no blackout periods, no unexplained drives to Alderton. This should have reassured me. It didn't. It just eliminated one explanation without providing another. March 2020 arrived, and with it my 1-year anniversary at Kessler. Deb gave me a certificate. Dale shook my hand. Nobody else noticed. The pandemic was beginning, and water treatment was essential work, so while the world was shutting down around us, we kept coming in. Masks now, temperature checks at the gate, hand sanitizer stations bolted to the walls, but otherwise, the same routine, the same rounds, the same numbers. I stopped looking at the old binders. I made a deliberate decision to stop. It was doing something to me, not just the anxiety of the mystery, but the way it was changing how I experienced my own job. I'd be walking my route, recording a reading, and I'd think, has this already been recorded? Have I already done this? Not today's check, but this exact action, this exact moment in some version of events I can't remember or haven't reached yet. The thought made my work feel hollow, performative, like I was tracing over lines someone had already drawn. So I stopped. I focused on the job. The pandemic gave everyone something else to worry about, and I let it distract me. For months, I was almost fine. Almost. Because there was one more thing that happened before I stopped looking, and I need to tell you about it even though I've spent a long time trying not to think about it. In early March, the week after my anniversary, I was in the maintenance office alone. Dale had called in sick, one of the first COVID scares, though it turned out to be a regular flu. I was organizing work orders, which meant I had the filing cabinet open. The bottom drawer, which I rarely opened, contained archived material, old safety data sheets, equipment manuals, and a few personal items previous employees had left behind. A calculator, a small desk fan, an unopened package of batteries, and a clipboard. It was an old brown clipboard, the kind with the metal clip at the top and the edges worn soft. There was a form clipped to it. A maintenance log form, the same type we still used. It was blank except for the date field, which had been filled in. The date was March 3rd, 2020, my anniversary, the day I was sitting there at that moment. And next to the date, in the technician name field, in my handwriting, M. Ellison. The rest of the form was empty, just the date and the name, as if someone had started to fill it out and stopped. Or was about to start. I put the clipboard back in the drawer. I closed the cabinet. I sat at my desk and I put my hands flat on the surface and I waited for my breathing to slow down. It was my handwriting. There is no question. There has never been a question. I worked at Kessler for another 14 months after that. I never looked in that bottom drawer again. I never went back to the old binders. I did my job. I recorded my readings. I filled out my forms. I had unremarkable conversations with Dale and Y and Deb. I attended safety meetings. I ate my lunch in the break room. I drove home in the evening light when the days got longer again. But something had changed in how I experienced time at that facility. I began to feel, and I know this sounds abstract, so let me try to be specific. I began to feel that my actions were not entirely my own. Not in a supernatural sense. Not like possession. More like recognition. Like the feeling of walking into a room and knowing you've been there before, except it never stopped. Every corridor I walked, every gauge I read, every valve I turned, I had this low-frequency awareness that it had already been done. By me. In my handwriting. Before I arrived. I started paying attention to the building in a different way. Not the equipment. The building itself. The concrete. The paint. The way sound moved through the corridors. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. Like how certain hallways in the sub-basement seemed longer on some days than others. Not dramatically. Not horror movie longer. Just by a few steps. Enough that my route, which I'd timed at 42 minutes for months, would occasionally come in at 44 or 45. I told myself I was walking slower. That was probably true. I noticed that the fluorescent lights in the Building C filtration gallery flickered in a pattern. Not randomly. Rhythmically. Like breathing. Once every 11 seconds. I timed it on multiple occasions. Always 11 seconds. Maintenance couldn't find anything wrong with the ballast. Old fixtures, Y said. They do that. I noticed that the water in the settling basins, which should have been flowing continuously, would sometimes appear perfectly still when I looked at it through the observation window. Completely motionless for 5-10 seconds, then flowing again as if it had never stopped. I asked the control room operator about it once. Had there been a pump interruption? He checked the logs. Continuous operation. No interruptions. Small things. Things that could all be explained. Things that I explained to myself. Every day. In reasonable terms. Confirmation bias. Hypervigilance. The way attention changes perception. I was looking for strangeness, so I found it. That's how human brains work. But then there was the issue with the timestamps. In April 2020, we transitioned from paper logs to a digital system. Finally. Tablet! A custom app. You'd enter your readings directly, and the system would timestamp everything automatically. No more handwriting. I was relieved. I thought, this ends it. No more ambiguous handwriting. No more old binders. Clean digital records with my login credentials and automatic timestamps. Definitive. For months it was fine. Better than fine. I could see my entries, cleanly logged, each one with a precise timestamp down to the second. April 7th, 10:42:33 a.m. April 7th, 11:15:07 a.m. Every reading exactly when I took it. Proof of myself. Proof of my presence in linear time. Then in September 2020, I was reviewing my logs for a quarterly report, and I noticed something. On September 2nd, I had logged a pump reading in Building B at 9:17 a.m. That was normal. That was when I usually reached that point in my route. But on the same day, there was also a reading logged in Building D at 9:14 a.m. 3 minutes earlier. Buildings B and D are on opposite sides of the facility. It takes at least 8 minutes to walk between them. There is no way I logged a reading in D and then a reading in B 3 minutes later. I checked my memory. September 2nd. What did I remember? Starting in Building A, moving to B, then C, then D. My normal route. I hadn't gone to D first that day. I was certain. I looked at the entry for Building D at 9:14 a.m. It was logged under my credentials, my username, my tablet. The reading itself was normal, a flow meter on the secondary clarifier. The number looked right. It was the kind of number I would have recorded if I'd been standing there looking at that meter. But I wasn't standing there. At 9:14 a.m. on September 2nd, I was in Building B. I remember this because I was early to Building B that day. I'd walked quickly because it was raining and the covered walkway between A and B had a leak I didn't want to stand under. I almost reported it as a system glitch. I almost said something to the IT contractor who managed the tablet system. But I didn't, because I didn't want to hear him say that the system didn't have glitches like that. That the timestamp and the GPS location on the tablet were definitive. That if the system said I was in Building D at 9:14, then I was in Building D at 9:14. I didn't want to hear that because I was already beginning to suspect it was true. It happened again, 3 more times over the following months. Always small discrepancies. A reading logged somewhere I hadn't been yet, minutes before I actually got there. Never anything dramatic. Never an hour's difference. Never a location I didn't visit that day at all. Just slight temporal slippages. As if my route was being completed in an order that didn't quite match my memory of completing it. I started paying extremely close attention to my own movements. I would note the time on my phone before entering each building and compare it to the tablet timestamp afterward. For weeks, everything matched perfectly. Then, on a Thursday in November, I don't remember the exact date, I entered Building C at 10:30 a.m. by my phone. I logged my first reading at 10:33 a.m. by the tablet. But when I looked at the entry afterward, the timestamp said 10:28 a.m., 5 minutes before I entered the building. My phone said 10:30. The tablet said 10:28. A 2-minute discrepancy that should have been 5 minutes if I was really logged at entry time. I know how this sounds. Clocks drift. Devices synchronized to different servers. There are 100 technical explanations. I told myself every one of them, but I kept feeling it, that sensation of doubling, of being slightly behind my own life, of arriving somewhere and finding that I had already been there, not visibly, not dramatically, just in the record, in the log, in the quiet testimony of numbers I had apparently already written. I want to tell you about one more thing, and then I'll tell you why I left. In January 2021, almost exactly 2 years after I started, there was a water main break in the sub-basement of Building A, not major, a 6-inch cast iron pipe that had corroded through at a joint. It happened overnight, and by the time the morning crew arrived, there was about 2 inches of standing water in the lower utility corridor. We spent the day on cleanup and repair. The pipe had to be cut and replaced, the water had to be pumped out, and the corridor had to be dried and inspected for damage. While we were doing this, Dale and I moved some old storage items out of the corridor to a dry area. Metal shelving, spare parts, old equipment. Under one of the shelving units, which had been standing in the same spot for what looked like years based on the rust patterns on its feet, we found a toolbox. It was a red metal toolbox, the lunchbox style with the latch on front. Old but not ancient, maybe from the 90s. We opened it because we needed to check if it contained anything hazardous, chemicals or old solvents that might have been stashed there by a previous worker. It contained tools, a socket wrench set, a small flashlight that no longer worked, a roll of Teflon tape, a utility knife, and a small spiral notebook, the kind you can buy at any dollar store. The notebook was damp but not destroyed. The toolbox had kept it mostly dry. I opened it. Pages of notes. Maintenance notes. Quick shorthand, Pump C7 bearing noise. Valve 14 sticking. Replaced gasket on HX3. Written in pencil in my handwriting. I didn't react. Dale was right there, 10 feet away, moving a shelf. I flipped through the pages. There were maybe 30 of them with writing. Quick observations. Equipment numbers. Dates, though not all entries had dates. The ones that did were from 2018. July, August, September, October. Near the back of the notebook there was a page that was different. Not maintenance notes. It was a list. Short phrases, stacked vertically. March 3, Locker 12, Green Jacket, Building C first. Deb will ask about emergency contact. Dale listens to AM radio. Coffee is burned. Park near the East Gate. I stared at this list for a long time. Then I closed the notebook and put it back in the toolbox. Nothing interesting, I told Dale. Just old tools. He nodded. We finished the cleanup. I went home. I thought about that list all night. I went through it item by item. March 3, my start date. Locker 12, my locker. Green jacket, my jacket. Building C first. That was wrong. My route started in Building A, except, and I had to think carefully to remember this. On my very first day during my orientation tour, the first building Deb took me to was Building C, the chemical storage, because she wanted me to see the safety showers and I wash stations before anything else. Building C first, she'd said. Get the safety stuff out of the way. Deb will ask about emergency contact. She had. During my paperwork. Do you have an emergency contact? My mother's number. Dale listens to AM radio. Yes. Coffee is burned. Yes. Park near the East Gate. Yes. That's where I parked, because the spaces there were closest to the maintenance office. The list was a description of my first day at work, written in my handwriting. In a notebook stored in a toolbox that had been under a shelf in a flooded corridor, possibly for years. It was instructions, or predictions, or a record of something that had already happened before it happened. I don't know which of these is worse. I tried to go back the next day to retrieve the notebook. I had a plan. I was going to take it, study it more carefully, look for any detail that might explain it. But when I got to the corridor, the shelving had been moved back, the floor was dry, and the toolbox was gone. I checked the area. I checked the dumpster. I asked Dale if he remembered what we'd done with the old stuff from the cleanup. He said we'd put it all back. The toolbox, too? I asked. What toolbox? The red one, under the shelf. He looked at me blankly. I don't remember a toolbox. I didn't push it. Dale is not a liar. He's not covering for something. He simply didn't remember it. Maybe he hadn't been paying attention. Maybe he'd been moving shelving at the moment I'd opened it. Maybe it wasn't important to him the way it was to me. Or maybe it hadn't happened. Except it had. I know it had. I remember the weight of the notebook in my hand, the slightly swollen feel of the damp pages, the smell of old pencil graphite. I worked at Kessler for 3 more months after that. I didn't find anything else. No more writing on walls. No more timestamp discrepancies, or if there were, I stopped checking. The digital logs seemed normal. My routine seemed normal. Everything was normal, except for the feeling. The feeling was this. I was not the first time this had happened. I don't mean someone else had experienced what I was experiencing. I mean, I had experienced it before. That or some version of me, or some pattern that was shaped exactly like me, had been in that facility before March 3rd, 2019. Had done my job. Had walked my routes. Had written my notes. Had worn my jacket and used my locker and noticed the same failing compressor and the same corroded valve. And somewhere in the record, in the logs, in the walls, in the concrete, in the rust, and the fluorescent hum of that building, there was an overlap, a seam where one iteration met another. And I had found it. I quit in April 2021. I told Deb it was for personal reasons. She said she was sorry to see me go and asked me to return my lanyard and my tablet. I did. I cleaned out locker 12. I shook Dale's hand. He said good luck in his quiet way, and I walked to my car parked near the east gate, and I drove away from the Kessler water treatment facility for the last time. I moved back to Columbus. I found another job, office work, nothing like maintenance. A cubicle with no utility corridors and no sub-basements. I filled out digital forms and nobody's handwriting was relevant to anything. I was fine for a while. Months. I slept better. I stopped thinking about it. I told myself it was over, whatever it was. It was tied to that place, and I'd left the place, and it was done. Then, in August of last year, I was unpacking a box of old things at my new apartment. Books and papers I'd had in storage since before Alderton. Things from my old Columbus studio. At the bottom of a box of notebooks, old journals, college notes, random scribbles, there was a spiral notebook I didn't recognize. Dollar store type. Small. Slightly warped, like it had been damp once. I opened it. Empty. Every page blank. But in the very center, one page had a small fold in the corner. I turned to it. Nothing written on it. Just the fold. I held the page up to the light. A habit from work, checking for watermarks on paper. And I could see the faintest indentations. Ghost impressions from a pen or pencil pressed hard on a page that had been on top of this one. I couldn't read them. Not really. But I could make out the shape of the letters. Tall. Narrow. Across 7. A dash over an I. I closed the notebook. I put it in the trash. Then I took the trash out to the dumpster behind my building. Then I stood in the parking lot for a while in the August heat, staring at nothing. I don't know what happened to me at Kessler. I don't have a theory. I don't have an explanation. I know that I worked there for 2 years and that it was, in every observable way, a normal job at a normal facility. I know that I found records that appeared to be mine from a time before I existed in that place. I know that those records were detailed, accurate, and consistent with the work I actually performed. I know that there was a notebook that described my first day in specific terms. I know that the building felt, at times, like it was remembering me. I know that I left. I know that it's been over a year since I quit, and I still sometimes catch myself looking at my own handwriting. On a grocery list, a note to myself on a sticky pad, my name on a package slip, and feeling a slight chill. Not because the handwriting looks wrong, but because it looks right. Exactly right. The same as it has always looked. The same as it looked in binders and on walls and in notebooks dated before I was there. I can't prove that my handwriting is mine. That sounds insane. But think about it. You trust that your handwriting is yours because you remember writing. You have continuity. You were there for every letter you ever formed. But what if there were letters you didn't form? Letters that look exactly like yours, in places you've never been, on dates you can account for. Then either someone is copying you perfectly, or you were there and don't remember, or you will be there and it's already been recorded. I don't like any of those options. There's one more thing. I debated whether to include this because it's not something I can verify and it might just be my mind doing what minds do when they've been destabilized. Finding patterns in noise. But I'll tell you anyway, because I think about it every day. About 6 weeks ago, I was walking to the bus stop near my apartment. It was early 6 in the morning, still mostly dark. I passed a construction site that's been active for months. They're building a new medical complex. The site was quiet at that hour. Nobody working yet. Just the skeleton of the building and the equipment sitting idle. On the temporary fencing around the site, there was a notice board. The kind construction sites have permits, contact numbers, safety information. I glanced at it as I passed, the way you glance at things without really reading them. But something made me stop. I stepped closer. In the bottom corner of the board, partially covered by a flapping permit notice, there was a small paper... a maintenance schedule, it looked like. A grid with dates and tasks. I lifted the permit to see it better. The header said Kessler Medical Complex. Building A... Below that, a schedule grid. And in the first column, a list of technicians assigned to Phase 1 maintenance. The third name on the list was M. Ellison. I stood there on the sidewalk, in the dark, at 6 a.m, reading my own name on a maintenance schedule for a building that doesn't exist yet. A building being built 2 blocks from my apartment in Columbus, Ohio, named Kessler. I let the permit flap back over the schedule. I walked to the bus stop. I went to work. I didn't go back to check. I haven't walked that route since. I take the long way now. 3 extra blocks. I don't look at the construction site. I don't want to see how much the building has progressed. I don't want to see what it looks like when it's finished. Because I think I already know. I think I know what the corridors look like. I think I know where the utility sub-basement will be, and what the fluorescent lights will sound like, and where Locker 12 will be located relative to the east entrance. I think I know because I've already been there, or I will be. Or I am, right now, in some layer of time that hasn't reached me yet, but has already left records. Logs, notes in my handwriting, a jacket in a locker, a name on a schedule. I don't know how to end this. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if I want it explained. I think explanation might be worse than mystery, because at least with mystery, there's the possibility that I'm wrong. That my handwriting isn't as unique as I think. That there's another M. Ellison. That timestamps glitch and memories blur and notebooks show up in boxes through normal channels. But if it's explained, if I knew for certain what was happening, then I'd also know whether it can be stopped. And I'm not sure I want to find out that it can't. I'm watching the building go up from my apartment window. Each week, it's a little more complete. A little more like a place where someone could work. Where someone could walk a route and check a gauge and log a reading and write their name at the top of a form. I sleep with the blinds closed now. Some mornings. And I'm almost done. I promise. I'm almost done. Some mornings I wake up and my right hand is sore. The web between my thumb and forefinger. The pad of my middle finger. The kind of soreness you get from gripping a pen for hours. I haven't written anything by hand in months. I keep my pens in a drawer. Last week I counted them. There were 6. I could have sworn there were 7.